Arizal, when he spoke to the Torah, he would say that the Torah he was saying was for the neshamas of the Talmidim. In other words, if they understood what he said, fine. If not, then the neshamas certainly understood it. They would appreciate it. And the neshamas means not just for the neshama now to appreciate, but for an elam haba, the neshama would gain the benefits of having these words added to the neshama's credit. Whatever a neshama has in elam haba and divrei Torah, these divrei Torah are extremely beneficial because he starts with the words he learned in this world. Whatever you learn here, in a sense, is more important than what you learn there. That's what's meant by Yaakov Teshuva Rosenfeld. That includes Torah. An hour of Torah learned in this world is more important than the Torah that's learned there. It's all based on what you get here. What's also meant for the neshama is that if a person, even if he understands, but doesn't evaluate what he is learning, in other words, we cannot judge exactly what the words of Torah are in value. The Yaakov says that there are certain words of Torah. Every word of Torah, without exception, is a mitzvah. Every word of Torah, as the Yaakov says, creates a malach. And this malach is beneficial to the person during his lifetime. That means every night. Every night a person's neshama goes on trial. And the Torah he learns, these malachim are his lawyers there. And they are especially beneficial at the final trial after he is installed. A person needs that defense, the heavenly trial then. When he has a lot of malachim to defend him, they can overpower the kafrik, the satan, who works to convict him. That's the second time. The third time, of course, is to have these neshamas serve him in Gan Eden. These neshamas that is malachim, serve in Gan Eden. This too is what the Arizal calls the candles, with which a person can use these lighted candles, searchlights, to seek in heaven to find the treasures of Gan Eden. But the difference that Arizal says from one malach to another could be so great, so vast, that one single malach can be more important, more powerful than 1,000 others. It's just like giving tzedakah. A person can give $1,000 tzedakah to one place and give $1 tzedakah to a second place, and the $1 can be worth more than 1,000. Giving 1,000 to some of these federations is worth nothing compared to $1 to Yeshiva and Israel, to a tzadik. The same thing too with words of Torah. A person learning one type, even the Gemara itself says that learning Chumash, for example, is a big mitzvah. At the same time, it's not a mitzvah because you could be learning Gemara at that time. It's midah v'eina midah. And if you go deeper than that, further than that too, Arizal says that the learning depth in Torah, Chachmas ha'emes, is so much greater that one malach can be bigger. An hour of learning Torah in depth can be more important than a full month of learning Torah on a regular level. This works according to the Elamis, the heavenly worlds. There are different levels, and each section of Torah refers to a different level of heaven. So that the level that's the highest, one word there is worth more than many words or hours below. Although both, of course, are extreme mitzvahs. Talmud tzadik neged kulon. Every word of Torah itself is higher than any other mitzvah. That's the unusual point about Torah, that the ikar of learning Torah is to perform, to carry out the mitzvahs of the Torah. And yet, since the whole purpose of learning is to carry out the mitzvahs, and yet of all the mitzvahs in the Torah, the biggest one is the learning of Torah itself. So we will try to concentrate tonight, like Tzari Shabbos Kodesh, a time when the Neshama Yisrael is just leaving, a time when the Hashpah of the Neshama Yisrael is here, a time when the Zman of David HaMelech, the Shabbos Malkasa is being accompanied back to heaven, and this lasts at least until Chatzos. At this moment, when there is so strong an aura of Kedusha, we'll try to discuss Torah in the higher level, despite the fact that we all present here are certainly not fit for the higher level. We wish we could be fit for the lowest level. Yet, as I say, for our neshamas that surely are fit, and the neshama will be the main beneficiary. In the Zohar Kodesh, Kisvei Arizal, we find that everything is based upon a person's obligations of performing mitzvahs during his existence. Existence means from the time that he was created until the final moment that he is no longer sent down to earth. Which means that he could have been created at the beginning of creation. He could have come to this earth at the first moment of creation. And the last time he is here could be thousands of years later. During that entire period, that's the time of his obligation. To cite a few examples, we started to mention last week the case of Moshe Rabbeinu. This is a repeat part of it. First, because we are speaking about the greatest neshama that ever existed, and his cases of Gilgulim. But to show first a short, brief, clear example, Arizal states the example of Yaacov and Kohen Gadol. This is a very short and sharp example. There are many. This is the briefest, the most pointed. The Gemara says, this is from the Gemara itself, just that Arizal's Megala, he reveals the secret behind it. The Gemara says Yaacov and Kohen Gadol was a tzadik Gadol, complete tzadik, during his entire lifetime. His was an amazing case when he was a perfect tzadik and a Kohen Gadol. He went into the Kodesh Kodeshim, and yet, of course, Kohen Gadol is the highest yichus that's possible. No matter who a person is, no matter how great, even David HaMelech, he hasn't got that privilege of being able to enter into the Kodesh Kodeshim of the Beis HaMikdash. This the Kohen Gadol has, and he has it for a reason. He's granted this benefit from heaven, this privilege, because he has a special neshama. So aside from being inside a Gomer, he was also a Kohen Gadol. He lived to the age of 80. On his 80th birthday, he dropped completely. So much so that his whole life was lost. In other words, he lost his whole chance for Gan Eden, literally. He passed away that day, and he could not go to Gan Eden. He lost everything. The Gemara says that Hashem pays separately for mitzvahs, and he pays separately for sins. We don't weigh one against the other. And yet there is a possibility of a person erasing all his sins with one blow, just with a moment of tshuva, but he's left only with his mitzvahs, without sins. On the other hand, a person can do one sin that is so serious, the sin of mocking, joking about a mitzvah, about Kedusha, where with this one move, one act, he can erase every one of the mitzvahs he struggled for a whole lifetime. The person who mocks the mitzvahs that are done. This was the case of Yaacov and Kohen Gadol, although of course the Arizal says that there was more depth to it. There's a question of a Kabbalah Inyan, he wanted to be Masakin something which was beyond his grasp, and in doing so he lost everything. The plain pshat, factually in pshat, is that there was an act done by Yaacov and Kohen Gadol the last moment of his life which erased everything. Now this would mean that he was lost. This meant Gehenna forever. Arizal says that he was given another chance at another Gilgul. And because he had left life as one as a Russia, he came back to this world as a Russia. It was up to him to amend, to correct what he had done before. Yochanan Kohen Gadol came back as Elazar ben Derdaya, who was a complete Russia during his lifetime, in every respect, until, to counteract his last act, the last day of his life. Just as before, the last day of his life, he had destroyed everything, so now in the last moment of his life, he arose to a height of teshuva that was so great that he corrected up to and including his last act as Yochanan Kohen Gadol. This is the secret why the Gemara says, that Moshe ben Derdaya, when the last day, he was told that he was too big a Russia to do tshuva, and he went out into the forest and he started in a spalo to do tshuva, and he asked that heaven and earth should pray for him, the rivers and seas should pray for him, mountains should pray for him. He called upon these because he had all this vast knowledge before as Yochanan Kohen Gadol. He had the contact with them. And when they turned him down, he said, in that case, then the chance for tshuva depends upon myself. He turned to the power of tefillah, which, of course, was closed to him. The gates were closed. And he turned to the power of demois, crying. He cried until his soul left him. And then a voice came from heaven and said, Rabbi, Elazar ben Derdaya, how did he get the title of Rabbi? He was now back, tshuva erases. He was now back to his status as Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol, as the Kohen Gadol, in purity with everything erased. So that now, this last one says, Mezuma means there is prepared for him. Which Elam Haba? What did he do this whole lifetime they had Elam Haba? At best, he had now erased his sins. Now where is the Gan Eden? Gan Eden, he now got back what he had as Yochanan Kohen Gadol. This, the Arizal cites as an example of a case. This, of course, is impossible to detect from the Gemara, to get the connection. The Arizal, as I said, is Megala. He reveals this connection. Now, we can understand more clearly the case of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the son, originally, first time was the son of Adam Hadishan. The three letters, Mem, Shin, Hey, the Zaydik Kodesh says go back. His last time on earth, completely, was the first letter. The first one was the Hey is Hevel, the son of Adam Hadishan. The second is the Shin, which stands for Shem Ben Noach, and of course also the son of Hadishan, Shais, who was the main one from whom the world came forth. He was, why is he called Shais? Because he was the Shais, means the foundation. The Mena Hushtas Elam, him came forth the whole world. Cain and Hevel were completely wiped out. Hevel was killed. Cain was wiped out afterwards, himself and all his descendants. Shais came forth the world. Noach came from Shais, the only one remaining on this earth. And then Shem, the son of Noach, the good one. Finally, Moshe Rabbeinu, the son of Avraham. These were his three major Gilgulim. The son of Adam Hadishan and Noach first. Now, note that there were these tzaddikim in sequence. Adam Hadishan was a tzaddik. The tzaddik who was so great that the Zaydik Kodesh says that Malachim, all the angels came to learn from Adam Hadishan. Noach, Ish tzaddik, 10 generations later, the biggest tzaddik was Noach. And again, 10 generations later, was Avraham Avinu. Now, to say the world began from where, the Gemara says the world began from Avraham Avinu. Well, it really began to count. The Hebord of, when they were created, the Hebord of, with the creation of the world, the Gemara says the Hebord of is the letters, the Avraham. It was with Avraham that creation began to count. Until then, even though they were tzaddikim, hidden ones, but they did not count because a tzaddik is only one who spreads yafutzu ma'ayin sechot, who spreads the emunah on Hashem. So in the question, between these three tzaddikim, who is the greatest? Adam Arishan, Noach HaTzadik, Avraham Avinu. We, of course, are not qualified to speak about the greatness comparing tzaddikim, chas v'sholom. We don't speak about it as opinion. We speak about it as is brought, written. There's no person has the authority or the knowledge to compare these tzaddikim. When it is brought, since Avraham Avinu was the first one from whom life, the world actually began to count, because it was for the sake of the Jews the world was created. Avraham Avinu being the first Jew, the father of all Jews. Between these three, Avraham Avinu was the greatest. We could understand why he was greater than Noach. The Zohar Kodesh says that the difference between Noach and Avraham Avinu was that Noach was a tzadik, but aside from being a tzaddik relatively compared to the ones in his generation, he was a tzaddik closed up himself, for himself. He did not provide for the rest of the world. He was not concerned with spreading this knowledge, spreading emunah to others. And even when the world was in danger of being wiped out, and then he first tried to give Musa to the world, this was a poor defense. Whereas Avraham Avinu, the posek says, "Nefesh asher asu b'choron," nefesh that he created. Also, he created b'choron. The city of Choron is mentioned just agav. Really, the Mepharshim say Choron means b'choron af, against the anger and chaos of the parents, the wives, the relatives, of all the people involved who considered this an act of kidnapping, taking away members of their family into a faith that was alien to them. So Avraham Avinu did this, incurring the wrath, the anger, the enmity of the world, b'choron af. They spread this emunah, belief in Hashem. When the time came, that part of the world was threatened with extinction. Stayman Amayda, today's Sedra. Avraham Avinu knew he had learned from the lesson from Noach that you don't try to attempt to go out and inspire, instill Yerushalmi in these people. It's a futile attempt, at least at a time when the Gezarat Din has already been sealed. What he did was, he inspired Hashem not to go out himself to these people and get them to return, but on his own merits, to influence, to sway the decision of heaven to save Stayman Ameda. He tried everything in his power up to what he thought was sufficient. He used every mitzvah possible. He said to Hashem, if there are 50 tzaddikim in the Stayman Ameda, the Zohar Kodesh says 50 tzaddikim, where would you find 50? What kind of a request was that? The answer was that he said to Hashem, the zechus of the 50 parshas of the Torah. If there's any one person who learned the Torah, the Chumash, which has 50 parshas, 50 sedras, that should be sufficient. Of course, there are 53 parshas, but we call it 50 because of the fact that there are 50 weeks in the year. We combine certain sedras. And that his tefillah was, any mitzvah, Torah should be life, Eitz Chayim. If there's one or less Chumash, it should be enough. If there isn't, he said, then, as the posek says, if there are 5 missing, Hashem agrees that there are 5 missing. So for those 5 cities should be wiped out. There are 45. 45, of course, is the name of Hashem, Yudkei Vavkei, the Miluai, the Gematria, Adam, which is 45. And then 40, again with the other days, the Sives and the Sides, 30, 20. 20 is the Aseres Hadibres, which stands for the Torah, which of course, the Gemara says stands for Shema Yisrael. Any person who doesn't even learn, who says Shema Yisrael morning and night, these contain the Aseres Hadibres, that's 20 together, even that little should be sufficient. And even if not, then 10 which means a person who just comes to shul, yasara batlanim, can even come to shul for a minyan. And that should be sufficient to save. But this was the tefillah of Aharon, who was much greater than Noach as a tzadik, and greater than Adam Arishan. The question, of course, why isn't Adam Arishan the greatest? After all, he was the esteemed kapov of Hashem. Could there be anything greater than the actual creation by Hashem? Hashem created Adam Arishan himself. And the answer is that this did not make him greater. The proof is that Malachim too were created by Hashem, and yet tzadikim are higher than Malachim. Arizal says that created by Hashem, remaining above, is not the emes, and is not the tachlis. The tachlis of greatness is only when there is a yerida first. So the shama in heaven, no matter how pure, cannot be that great. It has to come down to earth first, go through the yerida on earth, then it can reach an aliyah, an elevation that's far greater than anything which is above. So that's Avraham who went down to Mitzrayim, went down to these low places, and then rose up, went down to the pit of fire, the Kivshan Ha'esh, fighting for Emunah. His rise was greater even than Malachim and Adam Arishan. And we see proof too, unquestionably, Moshe Rabbeinu was greater than all tzaddikim, including Adam Arishan. He was the greatest tzaddik of all time. Moshe Rabbeinu was the son of Adam Arishan. And here we come to the deeper question, the point that he was Hevel. Adam Arishan had a son, Cain, who was older. Arizal says that the Becheda is very important, very vital. The Chayda, the firstborn, is automatically Kedusha. We cannot take that point away. Where there is Becheda, there is Kedusha. The fact is that if not so, it wasn't so, why would Yaakov Avinu be so anxious to get to Becheda from Esav? Isn't it sufficient for Yaakov Avinu to say, Esav is a Russia, the worst Russia in the world? If he's a Russia, Yaakov Avinu is a tzadik, that's enough to separate the two. Why seek the Becheda? The answer is that the Becheda itself is so much Kedusha that a person with Becheda is automatically on a higher level of Kedusha. That's why Yaakov Avinu wanted to have the Becheda dafka, to get this additional level of Kedusha. The Arizal says that Cain, at the time, had a higher level of Kedusha than Hevel, even though Cain was, in a sense, partially made up of the Satan himself, the Nochash. And Hevel was purely from Adam and Chava. Yet, the fact is that he had the Becheda. Cain was the Becheda. Now, so we're not dealing with a person, Cain, who was just a murderer, and Chas v'Shalom, or somebody entirely evil. Arizal says he was the Becheda, and Hashem spoke to him. He did not find ever that Hashem would speak to a Russia. The fact that Hashem spoke to Cain is a symbol of Cain's greatness. And of course we see throughout future generations the results of Cain through Gilgulim. When we say that there never arose one as great as Moshe Rabbeinu in the Chachma, except for Rabbi Yaakov, was in the direct Gilgul of Cain. This was the two, Cain and Hevel, later at their height, Moshe Rabbeinu and Rabbi Yaakov. But if we go back to the original case of Cain and Hevel, Cain, Arizal says, later killed Hevel because of the fact, for other reasons, but mainly because of the fact, as the Gemara says, that Hevel had two sisters. Cain had one sister. This we learn from the word Es. Now these sisters were given to them as wives, to be their wives. The Torah says that incest, brother marrying sister, is a sin that is disgusting. The word for disgusting is chesed. Te'eva or chesed. By other cases of incest, it says te'eva, means despicable. In case of brother or sister, it says chesed. Chesed too means an evil type of despicable act. And actually the word chesed has different meanings. In this case, chesed means despicable. At the same time, the Torah says, Eilam chesed yiboneh. The world is built, the world is created, is continued, is perpetuated through chesed. Chesed means the kindness of Hashem. Chesed, the Gemara says, means that through this act of chesed, which is despicable, brother marrying sister, that's the only way the world could exist. Through the chesed of Cain and Hevel marrying their sisters. So this was a chesed of Hashem, that he allowed this chesed to be permitted, brother to marry sister. Elam chesed yiboneh. So the chesed of Hashem, this chesed, this despicable act was committed, and only then could there be a binyan ha'olam. Now, since they were given their sisters to marry, Cain was filled with jealousy over the fact that Hevel had more than him. No matter what it was, of course, to have two wives is more difficult than having one. One is hard enough. To have two, that's called already a tzara. But two is more than one, and this was a jealousy on the part of Cain. And for that reason, he killed Hevel to steal his wives. And so, since this act was committed, there had to be a tikkun for it. This tikkun came about later when Moshe Rabbeinu came back as Moshe Rabbeinu, and Cain came back as Yisrael. Yisrael, we mentioned, had 7 names. One of the names was Keni. Keni has 2 meanings. One, it stands for Cain. 2, it stands for Kina, jealousy. He was the Cain who was jealous of his brother Hevel, and having killed him for the sake of this Ta'ila Yeseda, this additional twin sister. Also, the Arizal says that Yisrael was called Kohen Midyan. Kohen means the high priest of Midyan, and Kohen Midyan, the Arizal says, is the Gematria Zehu Cain. This is Cain. In addition, Kohen means the top. The reason he was called Kohen because Kohen means the top or the eldest. He was the Mechael, he was Cain. And now, there was his opportunity to be the second the crime he had committed. Cain came back. Now Cain had within him 2 parts, 2 divisions. One was the evil part, this evil ruach, which is part of what he consisted of. The second was the good section. These 2 had to be separated. Therefore, the reason why he came back simultaneously as the Mitzri, the Egyptian, whom Moshe Rabbeinu killed, and as Yisrael. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu now paid back this evil act from the evil section, the Chemikirah. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu looked at the Mitzri and he saw his Babayis Ubasoda, what he had done, Babayis Ubasoda. This Egyptian who he had killed was one who came into this Jew's house, took the Jew's wife, and then beat the Jew at the building of the wall. This was the act of Cain, taking the wife and wanting to kill a Jew. In turn now, Moshe Rabbeinu killed this Mitzri. Hayachas HaMitzri killed him. He now destroyed the evil part. What remained now was for him to receive from the good side of Cain, the Teshuva, to return that which was stolen. And therefore, he married, Yisrael gave, it says that Yisrael gave to Moshe Rabbeinu Zipporah, his daughter, for a wife. We don't usually find that statement. He gave his daughter to him. He gave to Moshe Rabbeinu Zipporah as Begimatria Moshe. She belonged to him originally as the Taimi Yisrael. This he now received back in return for the complete tikkun of Cain's act. Same time, now remains this question when a person comes back to Gilgul. Arizal says that where do we learn Gilgul from? Everything has an origin in the Torah, posek. Torah we find that posek says Doid Halach, the Doid Bo, V'ha'oretz Li'elam Emedis. Generation goes, that means dies, one generation dies, new generation comes, is born, and the world always remains, stays. So the Arizal says, generation comes, and that generation comes back. Those that died are the ones that come back. The ones that are born are the same ones that just died. This is the Gilgul. The Gemara said, it's a wheel that keeps turning. People die, people are born. The Zedek is not Galgul, but Gilgul Shechayzer Ba'elam. This Doid Halach, this Gilgul Shechayzer returns to this same world. The generation that died is the one that comes back now by Gilgul. But the Oretz, the Gemara says, is woman, it's the male. Female, the woman, she does not move. She is stationary. She doesn't have to come back with Gilgul, except through Aharon, except through the Gilgul of her husband. Then she is forced to come back with him. In this case, since the Ha'oretz, the woman has to come back, here was a case of Hevel, who had two wives. What about the two? We have one, Zipeda, the Tikuney Zohar, who was given back to Moshe Feinstein. What about the other? Here in Arizal's Megillah, we find the case of the Aharon and Miriam. It says that the Daber Aharon and Miriam and Moshe. Aharon and Miriam, sister of Moshe Feinstein. Brother and sister spoke about this Isha HaKushis Hashem Lakach. Isha Kushis, which Moshe Feinstein had taken. This Isha Kushis, the Gemara says Stam. Kushis literally means Negro. The Gemara says, what did they speak about Moshe Feinstein? What was the complaint? The complaint was that he had separated from his wife, Zipeda. Now Hashem said to Moshe Feinstein, you now stay with me, you remain with me, which means you now have a new kala, the Shechina. You must separate from your wife, despite the fact that you have two sons. Mitzvah Pi Yerivya is the son and the daughter. This is a machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. When has a person fulfilled the mitzvah? Beis Hillel say it must be a son and daughter. Proof? The fact that the purpose of Pi Yerivya is to perpetuate mankind. Just as Hashem created Zohar and Nekeva, so too must a person bring into this world Zohar and Nekeva before he has fulfilled the mitzvah. Beis Shammai say, we go to the highest source, who was the greatest tzadik that ever lived, who certainly fulfilled every mitzvah to completion, Moshe Rabbeinu. He had two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. If he had two sons, this shows that the requirement for fulfilling the mitzvah is two sons. The Tzibur will of course say that there is no proof, because this was of the Hadibur Shani. This was a command of Hashem. So this is an exception. Hashem said, stop. You don't go any further. This is, you are now released from the marriage to your wife. You have to attach yourself to the Shekhinah. So this, of course, what the Kabbalah means that in heaven, it is known that there is Chesed and Din, and in heaven there is Din supersedes Chesed. Beis Hillel are Chesed, Beis Shammai is Din. The heavenly Psak Halacha is like Beis Shammai. But the Kabbalah, this is the reason why Moshe Feinstein had to fulfill the mitzvah, because heavenly Psak is like Beis Shammai. But Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu now, you remain with me, separate from your wife. This was a command. He separated. The question is, though, why should Aharon and Miriam speak against Moshe Rabbeinu, separating from his wife? This was a command of Hashem. The answer is, the Gemara says that there were three things that Moshe Rabbeinu did on his own, without being told from Hashem. He had to decide it upon his own. One was the fact that he added an additional day. Hashem said the Jews before Matan Torah should stay away from, prepare themselves today and tomorrow, 2 days. And Moshe Rabbeinu added one additional day. He said 3 days, which was what Hashem meant. Hashem agreed. The second was that he broke the luchos, the tablets, on his own, not knowing whether this would be with the consent of Hashem, and that then Hashem said, "Yes, luchos asher shibarta," luchos which you broke. The Gemara says, what is asher? Yasher koyach sheshibarta. You did very well in breaking them, which means that he did it on his own. Hashem was masking. Third was that pidesh v'ishtay, he separated from his wife. Hashem consented. Now, these three things were done on his own. Arizal explains that this was his bechira, because he had so completely destroyed his Yetzer Hara, he had no more bechira left. There's no question of obeying the command of Hashem. Whatever Hashem said, of course, he did. So where was his bechira now? Free choice. Arizal explains that his bechira consisted only of doing that where there was no command. He had to decide upon his own what to do. This was his bechira, which is a much more difficult decision to be able to make. To be able to decide that which was correct and proper. These three he did. Hashem consented and he was right. So the bechira of Moshe Rabbeinu now was only to decide that which he had no information on at all. Now this was the highest type of bechira possible. Well, he wasn't commanded. It was the question was unknown. The action to be taken was unknown. And yet, the three things he did were consented to by Hashem completely. One of those three was to separate from his wife, which he did before Hashem said to the Ata Paya Madi Madi, which means he had separated prior to this command, and this is what Aharon and Miriam complained about, because they spoke about against Moshe Rabbeinu, because they had no suspicion whatsoever that he was wrong, until Zipporah told them that he had separated before he was commanded, and this is what they spoke against. Now this was during his lifetime as Moshe Rabbeinu, and every act that he did, Agav, was accepted by the Jews, except for a few who were chokin. The case of Kaidach, who was chelik, that's the difficulty during the lifetime of a tzadik emes, to have people believe then, not just after his nostalgus, but during his lifetime to have people believe in the tzadik emes completely. During the time of Kriyas Yamsuf, posek says, "Vayaminu, vayidim ha'am es Hashem, vayaminu ba'Hashem v'Moshe Avdai." They had complete faith. This was a time where they were so great that they were able to see, they were zechet to see Kaviyachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the Yamsuf. The Gemara says that even a maid, lowest man, a maid saw at the Yamsuf what even the Cheskel Hanavi did not see later on. Even the Lean couldn't see that great height. This was no ordinary maid, of course. Arizal says that we find throughout Shas that There were many great rabbis in the Gemara, tremendously great rabbis, and yet the case of Rabbeinu HaKodesh, the time of Rabbeinu HaKodesh is Stalkus. So the rabbis were praying for Rabbeinu HaKodesh to remain alive. There was a big battle going on between the heavenly forces who wanted Rabbeinu HaKodesh, who wanted the Neshama. The rabbis are not praying to keep him alive. This was sort of a stalemate. Forces in heaven and forces on earth battling each other for the Neshama of Rabbeinu HaKodesh. Till the Gemara says that Amsei the Levi, the maid of Rabbeinu HaKodesh, who was so great that the rabbis used to come to her with questions, she said, there's a battle going on, I pray you, let the heavenly forces win, and with this, the Rabbeinu HaKodesh was nostalgic to get him out of his suffering. Arizal says, how does a maid come to be so powerful, greater than the rabbis of the Gemara? Arizal says this was no ordinary maid, this was the kiruv of that maid that's mentioned at Yam Suf. When I was a Shif Chalayam, this was the maid of Rabbeinu HaKodesh, therefore she was so great. So at the Yam, the posek says that Vayiru ha'om es Hashem v'yamina b'Hashem. Es Hashem is Aleph Yud, v'yamina b'Hashem is Vav Beis, v'shtevis Eiv. Zayin HaKodesh explains that Eiv lived at that time. There's a machlekes in the Gemara as to when he lived, who he was, and so on. Zayin HaKodesh says that the Eiv lived during the time of Kriyas Yam Suf. He was one of the three who was in the advice given to Parei, and he was a tzadik emes at the time. And it was due to his assistance that the whole Kriyas Yam Suf came to pass. As the Vedic Kodesh says, that when the Jews came to the Yam Suf, as the Gemara says, the Satan began to complain in heaven, why should the Jews be saved in the Kriyas Yam Suf? The Egyptians were idol worshippers, and the Jews too. Why are these any better than these? This was a powerful complaint, and of course, even though he may have been justified, Hashem wants chesed, wants kindness, goodness for his people, yet it must be in a manner that fits in with law. And that's what the Mekateg, the Satan, complained about. Law is law, din is din. We must follow the din. Either both are saved or both are drowned. Zayda Kodesh says a mashal to a shepherd who was trying to bring his flock over the sea, across the river. And then he sees a big wolf coming to attack his flock. Now, what can he do about saving his flock? He was in a quandary. He looked up and he saw among his flock a powerful ram. So he decided he'll sick this ram on the wolf. This ram is strong enough to defend himself. While these two are battling it out, he'll be able to bring the flock across over the waters safely. And then, when they are safely across, he'll go back and he'll rescue the ram from this wolf. And this is what Hashem did. In order to get the mind of the Satan off the Jews, Hashem said to the Satan in reply, did you see my servant Eve? What a good person he is, how wonderful he is. And the Satan then answered, but you give him everything, the rest of the story. So Hashem said to the Satan, well, he's in your hands now, do as you please with him, but you must see that his life is spared. The Satan occupied himself with Eve, and at that time Hashem took the Jews over across the waters of the Red Sea. And they were saved. The Jews were saved, and then Hashem was able to turn back of Yaakov to the Satan and to save Eve from the Satan. That's why the Arizal says this is proof in the posek Es Hashem Emin Hashem. Exactly at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf, you have Eve there, right in the center on the story of Kriyas Yamsuf, just before the words of Yashir of Kriyas Yamsuf.
This is mentioned Yaakov, but back to Moshe Feinstein, who at this time was the leader of the Jews, already taking them out of Egypt. If this took place, the story of Kriyas Yamsuf took place when Moshe Feinstein was 80 years old. What happened prior to that? You know that at the age of 40, he was driven out of Egypt. He left Egypt when I wanted to kill him. And 40 years of his lifetime is a mystery. He fled. He was hidden someplace. Where did he go to? He went to the land of Cush. Letter says, there he stayed at the home of the king of Cush, Melech Cush. Now, once more, we say that Aharon spoke against this Isha Cush's Yaakov. The Pshat, the Gemara says, is Zipayah. Why would the Gemara call? Why would the Torah call Zipayah Cush's? Cush's is a Negro. Why would she be called Cush's? The Gemara said because Cush's means one who is different than the average, the ordinary, the normal. Just as the skin of a Cushi is Meshuna, different than the skin of a normal person. So too was Sipayah Meshuna of Naseha. She was a tzaddik compared to the normal person. She was called a Cush's in comparison ratio to any other woman. You find that in the Navi. The Navi says, Halay Kevei Kushiyim Atemli. The Navi says to the Jews, Hashem says, you are like Bnei Kushiyim, like Negroes. What kind of a compliment is that? The Gemara says, you are so different from the rest of the people in the world, just as Negroes are different in their color. And therefore, in Shida, the Jews say, proudly, Shechayda Ani V'Nova B'nai Yerushalmi. I'm black, but Nova beautiful B'nai Yerushalmi. You 70 nations. Black is beautiful. B'nai Yerushalmi means 70 nations. You, the members of the UN, the 70 nations of evil, I'm black meaning I'm different than all of you. I'm outstanding. You are all impure, and I'm outstanding, just as a Negro is outstanding in color his way. Often that's how the Jews are outstanding and different, the Kusha. This was a meaning of the Kushas, not Chas Shalom, meaning it physically, Aharon was on his son. The Sholim dared to interpret it. The meaning is purely that she was white and pure to an extent that she was extremely different from all of us. Therefore, they spoke of this Isha and Kusa Shabbat. They spoke against him. His tzaddik is intended to be taken, and now he separated himself from her. How did he do that? Before he was commanded to do so by Hashem. This is one. The Arizal says that there is a deeper hidden meaning in it. Because then too, why would they speak against his doing it? If they see that Hashem, Teshuva says that the reason they spoke was because they found out he was separated before Hashem told them. Still, once they had seen that Hashem said it, had consented, why did it be a problem though? Therefore the Arizal said that the hidden meaning of this is that Lokach means engaged, not married. Kuchen. When he went to Cush, Mary took the princess of Cush. Vashti, the princess, for the widow of the king in 2 days. The widow of the king of Cush, he took her, he became engaged to her. He lived there 40 years without any contact, without consummating, without any marriage at all. 40 years spent with her as Judicious, engaged but not married. And then he left. And it was this Isha Pushis that they spoke about, why he had taken her without Kiddushin. Either you marry, or you don't become engaged in the first place. His secret of doing it was, this is the secret being discovered, that this Isha Pushis was the other Talmud Yeseda, the other twin of heaven. And this way he had to take both of the sisters that were really his, one as a real wife, and one just to be gates in the mitzvah of Kiddushin alone, the Kuchen. That was Isha Pushis, the other twin of Hevel. He took during his period of 40 years, and he came back. For the last 40 years, he now took Zipeta, a Talmud Yeseda. With this, he had completed the complete tikkun of Hevel. This was the final time the current appearance in this world, and Moshe Rabbeinu. Of course, he was so great afterwards that at no time in existence is there a generation without Moshe Rabbeinu being here to a degree. Part of Moshe Rabbeinu comes down to earth in the form of every tzadik. But the bigger than anything was that having fulfilled the mitzvah of children and having fulfilled the mitzvah of having children too, he was now able to separate himself from his wife. He now had completed marriage and having children. As we said, he did have children. Why is that? Of course, having children means, with the consent of heaven, that he was Yetzer. According to Beis Shammai, 2 sons are enough. And heavenly Psak Halacha is like Beis Shammai. So he had fulfilled the mitzvah of Priya V'Nivya. The Zohar Kodesh says that without children, a person cannot get into Gan Eden. He must have this mitzvah. Now, the Zohar Kodesh tells us that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Cheskia were 2 rabbis who had no children. Rabbi Yochanan had no children because his sons died. He had 10 sons that all died. And if Chas v'Sholom children died and the mitzvah is not completed, Cheskia was an Akkad. He couldn't have any children. The Zohar Kodesh said Rabbi Yochanan was crying about this, and he spoke about the mitzvah of having children at old age, as we find the case of Boaz, who married Ruth. Though Boaz had 30 sons and 30 daughters, 2, they also passed away before he married Ruth. Married out that even at old age, a person should not stop. You never can tell which children count. The Yochanan was crying about this. He said, am I really lost for Elam Haba? The Zohar Kodesh says that all his Talmidim rose up and said to him, why should you worry? We are your children. We drink from your waters, from your Torah, so that through us you have children. But the Yochanan was not pacified by this at all. He said, this is the question of a Talmud and a son, and the 2 are not alike. Each one has its merits, but they are still not exactly the same. Then one Sava, one old rabbi, rose up and he said to Rabbi Yochanan, I will give you the answer. Posek in the Torah which says, Koi Omar Hashem, so says Hashem, Asorisim, to those who are soris. Soris means who are sterile, who cannot have children. Hashem says, V'nasati lachem, the end of the posek, I will give you, V'nesi u'v'chaim Isai, in my home and within my borders, Yad Vashem, a foundation and a name, Teiv mibonim u'bonais, better than sons and daughters. Shem Eilam Etemai, an eternal name,
that will never be cut out, never be lost. There will be no kodesh for the neshama. And what is that? Asher yishmeru es shabsisai. Those who will observe completely the mitzvah of Shabbos, these sorisim, these who have no children, will be considered, with me, Hashem says, better than sons and daughters. Yochanan heard this, and he said, now my mind is completely at ease. Nothing else could have pacified me. Now my mind is at ease. The Zohar Kodesh says, this is the final word. This finalized it. It's so great. It's Shmiras Shabbos, which means watching, guarding the Malka of Hashem, the Queen of Hashem. So great it is that Hashem considers these as His closest servants. This is why we stress so often things that are considered small, slight, when it comes to Shabbos, when this is what's meant by Yishmeru, to observe the Shabbos carefully, especially the time, the Zman of Shabbos, the Chnisosoi will be Tziosoi, time when Shabbos enters, which means that a person should not be lax when it comes to either lighting candles, the time for lighting candles, or the time for being completely dressed and ready for Shabbos on time, not to let the time come too close to a deadline. In this case, deadline means that literally. Same thing to a person should not be too hurried about letting the Shabbos go. That's why we stressed very strongly the mitzvah of being the Acher the Shabbos. How important it is for the neshama. The very beginning of the Zohar Kodesh begins with this statement that when Shabbos is over, fires of Gehenna are relit. It is specifically for those who are in a hurry to end the Shabbos. That even if, let us say, there is permission granted to end the Shabbos a few minutes earlier, it's those few minutes that's considered observing, guarding, respecting the Shabbos. How important it is for a person to add these few minutes. These people who are particular in those additional few minutes are those who are called Yishmeru es Shabsisai. They value the Shabbos. They don't want to get rid of it, Chas v'Shalom, release themselves from it. So, to put it in clearer perspective, if let us say the Shabbos legally may be out 52 of 60 minutes after the Shkia, since there is a day of 72 minutes, how much healthier it is for a person to keep that Shabbos. These few minutes are unimportant, perhaps, in the eyes of some. Yet these few minutes are the difference between keeping the Shabbos and respecting it. Respecting it highly. Sending your respect very highly, you don't cast away. It's these additional few minutes, and it's the Shabbos itself, how carefully it's observed. Observed means, the Gemara says, the Zohar Kodesh says, with especially speech. Since an Odom, the Dabe, is symbolized by the power of speech, therefore the Shulchan Arizal said to his own mother on Shabbos, when she was speaking, he said to Ima Shteki, mother, silence. Today is Shabbos. Not to speak words that are not fit for the Shabbos. That's words on Shabbos that pertain to any kind of business or politics or what of the Talmud. To watch carefully over a person's tongue at all times, but especially on Shabbos. That's Yishmeru Shemer L'Shon Cho. Guard your tongue not to speak words of Chol a weekday on the Shabbos. One who observes the Shabbos, who's Shomer, who guards and watches the Shabbos, that person in the eyes of Hashem is more precious, a better name, a Shem Tov, better than sons and daughters, either according to Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel. A person like that will be given a Shem Tov, Bevesi u'lechomoisai, within the home of Hashem, here and in Gan Eden, Shem Olam attain light. Hashem will give him a name that is everlasting, that is eternal, because this person is the closest to Hashem, closest to the Queen of Hashem.